Hi, my name is Anna Marie Picarello, and today I'm going to be giving a book review as well as some plot analysis about Ruth Kluger's memoir called Still Alive. So Ruth Kluger today is a professor, and she has won awards for this memoir as it was one of the bestsellers in Germany at one point, and she really searches what it means to be a survivor throughout this writing. So just to give a little bit of a background, in her early days, she lived a life of a daughter in Vienna, and she really describes what occurred after the invasion of Nazis in Austria. And she experienced the Holocaust with her and her family, and they were forced into concentration camps by Hitler. She covers death camps along with her escape from the war camps, her life story after, and the diseases and hunger faced in the concentration camps. So one thing I would like to mention is she makes it very prevalent that she does not want to register as a Holocaust survivor because she doesn't want, because registering doesn't require being associated with the inequality people faced in the concentration camps. It sort of just groups their suffering together, and she also says that suffering does not unite victims. So she talks about a lot of these ideas in the retrospect of why she does not want to register as a Holocaust survivor, and she says it contributes to the preparation of another Holocaust. So throughout her childhood, she faced a lot of oppression. She spent time in Vienna, Austria with her parents, and they all struggled with daily hatred. At the age of 7, Germans, led by Hitler, invaded Austria, controlling everything in it. She encountered depression because she really lacked an early childhood because of a lot of the hatred she would receive in school, and the lack of freedom that occurred during her childhood. She also talked about how not only in the concentration camps, but through her childhood, boys were seen as superior, and this developed into a later society where she said that society views men to be superior. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how her story conveys that. But going to Auschwitz, so the life in Auschwitz was very complex, and she described survival to not even be average. Death sort of became normal, and no one was taught anything good in concentration camps in terms of, she said it was all intolerance and disrespect and lowering the baseline of basic human decency. She talks about the dangers of Auschwitz and the attacks, exposing the horrific, deadly circumstances and the dangers of these environments. She also describes how life in Auschwitz was different for women and compared to men. So for women in concentration camps, life was described to be brutal. They could not make any decisions for themselves, and all of them forced into concentration camps encountered things such as rape, death, and loss of their children. Women sometimes were separated from their children during this process, so they didn't even know if their children were dead or alive, and the Holocaust experiences of women, she says, weren't equally recognized around the board. In addition, women also faced risky pregnancies, abortion, a lot of sexual assaults through their stay at these camps. A lot of the women also died due to gas chambers and bullets. A lot of men were either sent to work or more so killed on the spot. A lot of the women's sufferings were a little bit more prolonged in the way she describes it. I also thought that point was a little bit more interesting. She does later escape, though, and she flees to Bavaria and 2 years with her mother, and 2 years later she immigrates to America. In the United States, she learned at Hunter College, where she studied German literature, and she began teaching as a professor at German universities in her later life. She also expresses her hatred for German museums because she doesn't view them as an effective model. She views them as a model for a massacre and not an effective way to negate another one, and she views it as a preparation for another Holocaust. So one of her poems was actually displayed in a museum without her consent, and she actually fought to get that removed. So overall, she reveals the horrific outcomes of the Holocaust, as well as some of the rapes experienced, some of the hunger and disease and sexual assault. So and she also really describes the patriarchal aspect of this and how women really had no choice for themselves. Of course, everyone was a victim in their own retrospect, but she said that war was more the decision of men, and women really didn't have a say in this process. They were kind of just collateral damage and viewed as such, and even more dehumanized in a lot of cases with retrospects to the men. So my personal thoughts on the book was it was a little difficult to map out because of the chronological order of this. And she puts a lot of her own internal dialogue into some things in the past tense. So the tense is a little bit mixed up, and although the story happens in chronological order, the narrative is flip-flopped, which confused me in some retrospects, but I did think that the book was an overall very interesting read, and I really enjoyed reading her take on Holocaust and what it means to be a survivor. So now I'm just going to share some of my favorite quotes throughout the book. The first one, their secret was death, not sex. That's what the grown-ups were talking about, sitting around late around the table. So I thought this one was very interesting because a lot of times parents try and hide things from their kids or something that might be inappropriate. But in this case, they were actually hiding death. And how do you hide something so horrific from children? Another quote was, "But on the streets for all to hear, the Nazi boys were singing the song about Jewish blood spurting from their knives." So this one I thought was very interesting because people tend to view children as innocent, but in this case it was actually quite the opposite. Children were actually brainwashed way more easily than adults in this case, and the experience of hatred really spread throughout the school systems as well. Another quote that really spoke to me is, "Besides, women have no past or aren't supposed to have one. A man can have an interesting past, a woman can only have an indecent one, and my stories aren't even sexy." So this one really displays how she doesn't think women's stories were as significant, and how the society views it that way. And this one really displayed the patriarchal values and how they differ. I thought this was pretty interesting in that retrospect. A lot of the common themes throughout the book is it reveals tragedy with death becoming normal, and she also talks about escaping death, hence the title, Still Alive. She does reveal a lot of the horrific outcomes of faced by Jewish people, such as hunger, death, sexual assaults, but a lot of perseverance throughout this happening, and also how it affects her life today. Another common theme throughout the book was the theme of the patriarchal society. She discusses this in her childhood, she discusses it in Auschwitz, and she discusses it after leaving the war in terms of being a survivor. And she said masculinity was directed to silence women via rape and sexual assaults that forced them to acquire risky pregnancies and even abortions in Auschwitz. So that part was very interesting. In terms of being a survivor, she states, "They seemed to render women outside the realm of acknowledged war memories that males seem to own." So she talks about war memories as owned by men and not women. So this is very interesting to me because this is in a lot of cases, when we do learn about war, we learn about the male side of things. We don't really learn about the collateral damage that women are facing because they're viewed as collateral damage in war in a lot of cases. So I thought her thoughts were overall really interesting. I did like the read. I would recommend. It is a little bit hard with the flipping of the narrative, but she has a lot of interesting thoughts, and I would recommend you read it. Thanks for listening.